Hey there, it's your boy, Trash at Fighting Games here. I'm just kidding, my name's Taffy, and welcome to my 10,000 subscriber special. Although the title says otherwise, I would actually call myself intermediate at fighting games. You know, I've won a few rounds against platinum ranked players on Street Fighter 6, no biggie. I play a decent noob cybot in Mortal Kombat 11. Nobody can touch me in Dragon Ball Z Extreme Butoden, because nobody else plays it. And I've even dabbled in Fightcade. I've never won a session. Bruh. Needless to say, although the fighting game genre is one of my favorites in this massive world of video games, no fighting game can make me feel better than when superheroes or anime characters are in it. Haha, you gon' make me act up. You gon' make me do something. Superheroes love to box, so it makes a lot of sense to put them up against each other so you can beat the dog poop out of your bodies or some level 9000 gooner on the interwebs. If you're a regular viewer of my channel, you can tell that I'm a big superhero guy, and if you've seen that one video I made around 2 years ago making fun of Injustice 2's suit designs, you might also believe that I'm an ungrateful, entitled little baby. But that's far from the case. I love all superhero fighting games that we have, and whilst I made fun of certain aspects of Injustice 2, I want to make up for it by giving it more of a chance in this retrospective. Also, I never made it super clear that although I didn't like the character designs, my point was kind of useless since there's a gear system in the game, which means that whole video is low-key somewhat redundant, but I don't care. This video is my massive love letter to superhero fighting games, which I've held very close to me for a long time now, and I think this would be a fitting topic to use for my 10,000 subscriber special. Making YouTube videos for an actual audience has been a dream of mine since I was like 10 years old, and I chose this topic for my 10k special because I'd only played about half of these games before making this, so I decided to treat myself for achieving this milestone by doing something I've always wanted to do. Mess about and play the fighting games I've always wanted to try, whilst turning it into a fun video which can be shared with you guys and give insight on my experiences with these games. There are probably going to be a few stories sprinkled throughout this video, so get ready to learn some taffy lore. But before we get into this, I want to go over a few things quickly before some smarty pants commenters bite my hand off. First, I'll be talking about the PvP superhero fighting games, where the main focus of the game is to go up against other people. So no Marvel Ultimate Alliance today, unfortunately. Second of all, I won't be going over every single superhero fighting game that's ever been made, but the ones that I have the most experience playing and just knowledge of in general. I also won't be going through the stories or campaigns of these games because most of them are just excuses to get superheroes to fight each other, even if it would be out of character for them. Like, I don't think anybody watching this will lose sleep because I didn't recap the Injustice story mode for like the 600 billionth time on YouTube. And if you do,
you gonna make me act.
But with that aside, let's start off with a little knowledge on the game that pretty much started it all. From what I've seen, although superhero games had been around for a little while, with comic book heroes and characters dominating the classic beat-em-up genre, the first 1v1 style fighting game to include superheroes was X-Men Children of the Atom. Capcom were already on fire with the Street Fighter series, and Street Fighter 2 had been popping off worldwide, so Marvel decided to collaborate with Capcom, giving them the rights to use the X-Men for their first game together, which led to a long alliance between Marvel and Capcom, producing over 7 original games, not including re-releases or alternate versions. Fittingly, Marvel's biggest competitor, DC Comics, would partner with Capcom's biggest fighting game competitor, NetherRealm, which led to the creation of Mortal Kombat vs. DC. It was generally disliked by fans, and when NetherRealm next tackled a game using the DC universe, they left out Mortal Kombat entirely and Injustice was born. We're gonna go chronologically, so that means we're gonna start with the game that first made me a fan of the fighting game genre in the first place, which is
Marvel vs. Capcom!
Marvel vs. Capcom 1 was released for Sega Naomi arcade systems in 1998 and soon after ported onto consoles such as the Sega Dreamcast and PS1. Its production was led by Kenny Kataoka, I'm so sorry if I butchered that, and unlike the first of the Marvel Capcom fighting games, decided to try and switch things up by making the game a 2v2 fighter. Now of course, this game was originally made for arcade systems, so there isn't a simultaneous team battle going on here. But you can pick out 2 playable Marvel and Capcom characters alongside a randomized assist character that can make your games last a little longer as you play. This game and I have such a brilliant dynamic that I'm gonna explain to you guys through a little bit of lore. Imagine this. It's 2022, I hadn't made my grand transformation into cardboard yet, Nintendo had just announced the closure of the 3DS and Wii U eShops, and I was in a pretty big panic. You see, I hadn't at this point modded my 3DS, and I was in a bit of a pickle. Nintendo were about to get rid of the eShop, which had all my favourite games at a fair price. Well, fair enough. And as a broke teenager, I had no way of buying these games from resellers, especially when they were being priced like they had just been released. But that's when your boy found out about the brilliant world of emulation. Police, if you're watching this, this is a fake story. Now, I won't get into the nitty-gritty because I don't want my channel to get stone cold stunned by Nintendo, but through my emulation pilgrimage, I found out about this community which played arcade and early console fighting games on this amazing platform called Fightcade. And this platform is where I first played Marvel vs. Capcom. I'd played other fighting games before this, such as Injustice, Street Fighter 4 and some others, but this was my first time really getting invested. It was gorgeous, a masterpiece, a godsend if you will. I booted up the game, picked my GOAT, and began to...
Get him up, let him get up, let him get up, let him get up. Help me!
I got beat up so bad, bro. I used all my favorite characters and never got past the second CPU in the arcade mode, let alone dare to try and play a real opponent online, especially the ranked players. And this being my introduction to the game did make me stop playing for a while. But it took a while after my shame to realize that if I ever wanted to be good, then I'd need to train, and if I want to stay trash, I give up. Let's just say I dropped the game for a year. I know, that's lame, but I've been getting good at it recently. I remembered my Fightcade password and I've been training a little bit. I'm still not great, but at least I can get past the second stage now. This game feels awesome. Marvel vs. Capcom 1 controls like Street Fighter because, well, Capcom. The game is a crossover including other Capcom characters, and although I love a good game with Jin, the Marvel characters absolutely steal the show here. Their movesets were put together and planned out to match their practical strengths and characteristics, and Spider-Man, being like everybody's favourite Marvel character, was done so perfect here. Spider-Man moves in a way that I could never have imagined myself. In the cartoons before this, Spider-Man had always moved more like a man rather than a spider, but this game clearly takes heavy inspiration from Todd McFarlane's art because his movement is limitless. Then Captain America in this game is a flipping tank. He can throw his shield and is truly an American dream, but if I had to choose a proper main in this game, it would be Gambit. He's got the best combos, I really love his quickness, and his reach is decently far and not too close quarters. And when playing this game there are two speed options, normal and turbo. Turbo is for pro gamers like me of course, and it makes this game move at a pretty fast pace. Not as crazy as you'd expect, but it's noticeably faster than normal. The combos also feel a little bit better when you play in turbo mode as well, and there's a little less floatiness with the characters when you do air combos and jump. Like I said earlier, there's 2 character slots available and an assist, so it allows you to get creative with your character combos, but because the assist is randomized, you kinda just have to pray you get something cool. The physics do feel a little floaty when you jump or get hit with an air juggle, and figuring out certain mechanics like switching characters through trial and error took some time, but many characters' combos flow like crazy, and the gameplay feels pretty sharp to this day. But this game's biggest issue is its character selection options. In comparison to successors, MVC1 has a very humble roster with a much more limited Marvel universe, which is probably its weakest point in retrospect because that makes the other games in the series much more appealing due to their wider and better character selection options. The art style of this game doesn't change too much from previous entries, other than changing the colours of some characters to be slightly less bright. There are some variant colours for players 1 and 2, but for the most part the characters are very nice to look at. They stick to that style of 90s comics but with a lot less detail of course, since a 16-bit arcade fighting game can't include all the tremendous amount of hatching that Jim Lee or Rob Liefeld would use. However, some characters' colours could be a little better, such as Spider-Man who looks sort of orange, or Venom who I prefer to have more of a purple look. The backgrounds in this game only elevate from what we've seen in the previous Capcom Marvel fighters. The details, both in depth, shading, and colour variation are nothing short of spectacular. I could stare at the blue area of the moon stage for hours on end. Then the contrast on the Onslaught stage needs to be studied like it's a masterpiece, because it is. As an artist, I don't know where I first heard this, but I heard someone say that contrast is everything in creating dynamic art. And this might be a prime example. The night sky is an amalgamation of these dark blues which are able to make the night sky look dark but not hopeless, with hints of magenta in the corner to add enough flair but not to overpower the scenery. But then as your eyes follow down into the bright warmth that is the city behind the ledge your characters are fighting on, the colors are so well blended that you really have to pay attention to the details so you can realize that it isn't just the light brightening this warm city, but that the buildings have been set aflame. It's on fire, and the orange used is so crucial in representing that, because if they used red, it would have been a lot more overt and distracting. But by keeping the colors dually toned between orange and blue, the contrast is there but doesn't clash. This stage is just a flipping masterpiece.
You gonna make me act up.
Look at this atmosphere! I sound like a bootleg internet pit stop right now, damn. And Marvel vs. Capcom 1 has such an amazing soundtrack. It feels campy, inspiring, empowering, and all the character themes match their characters so well. Marvel vs. Capcom 3 later on remixes a lot of these themes, so I'll talk about that more later, but I just want to spotlight how amazing this soundtrack is. Although this is not the most popular game in the Marvel vs. Capcom series, Marvel vs. Capcom 1 is such an iconic game for me. Its gameplay is slightly dated, however its aesthetic is almost timeless, making it nostalgic for people like me who weren't even alive when it was first released in the 90s. The music, the designs, and the colors are all beautiful, and it feels great to play to this day, but with it trying to speak in a manner that's as objective as possible, I don't think it deserves the top spot on my list. So trying to be fair, I'll give this game a 3 out of 5. It's genuinely a really good game mechanically, and it's great on the eyes, but the small character roster holds it back in comparison to almost every other game on this list, so that's my final answer.
Ready?
Marvel vs. Capcom 2. This game is a great sequel, as it's able to exceed the original game in almost every way possible, and being flawed only due to the certain stylistic choices which I feel are rather personal, therefore making this game fundamentally better than its predecessor to most people. The game came out in 2002, with its production led by Yoshihiro Sugo. It was released on consoles such as the Sega Dreamcast, PlayStation, and Xbox rather than just arcade systems. Therefore, this game feels much larger in scope in a lot of ways when comparing it to the first game. However, this game is actually quite rare to find in physical copies due to the release being very limited on the PlayStation and Xbox consoles, and although it was more prominent on the Sega Dreamcast, the console didn't last too long before it was discontinued. Regardless of all those bridges to cross, Marvel vs. Capcom 2 has stood the testament of time. It was an instant hit and received lots of critical acclaim, and it's a beloved game to many people, both from the fighting game community and the Marvel fandom. It was able to stay alive during the 2000s with digital availability, however, in 2013 it became much rarer to find after licensing issues between Marvel and Capcom arose due to Disney buying out Marvel and wanting to retain the rights to all Marvel gaming titles at the time by attempting to self-publish games. Expanding upon the first game's mechanics, Marvel vs. Capcom 2 is a 3v3 fighting game, in comparison to the first game, which is a 2v2 with assists. I feel like the first game could have done this, but the lacking roster of characters would have gotten a little boring to keep using a 3v3 style. However, Capcom included a very large roster of both Marvel and Capcom characters in this one, where it will take you a very long time to combine and mix and match your teams and create a comp that will be efficient and personal to how you want to play. Personally, I found the most success playing with a team comp of the Sentinel, Psylocke, and Magneto when trying to beat the arcade mode. But I love playing Spider-Man and Doctor Doom as well, because they're some of my favourite Marvel characters and they're pretty fun to play as. The gameplay in this entry has been changed to a more compact 4-button system, where the shoulder buttons function as assists and for ultimate moves. The left stick holds importance as the different flick variations and combos you do with buttons can give you more different moves like in the first game. I'm happy that it's much clearer on how to switch characters in this game because it took me ages of toying around with MVC1 before I found out how to switch. So I think it depends on personal preference when it comes to gameplay, but I think that the classic 6-button control system is slightly better than the 4-button controls because it makes combos feel a little more deserved when hitting them than in the later Marvel vs. Capcom games. And I also tend to spam a little more when playing MVC2 rather than the former. I play the classic controls in Street Fighter 6, so I may be biased, but I will say that Marvel vs. Capcom 2 definitely has more of an edge than the first by a long shot with its characters, smoother animations, and less daunting controls. I don't know if this is a hot take or not, but I much prefer the look of Marvel vs. Capcom 1 in comparison to the sequel, Marvel vs. Capcom 2. As it went from the arcade to console jump, not only has the roster expanded, but so many other features as well. The voices and music are much less compressed, the character art in the menu is able to maintain the detail of hand drawings, and the biggest change is probably the backgrounds. In Marvel vs. Capcom 1, the stages are pretty much just flat GIFs with false depth and minimal moving features, which allowed for the artists to make the stage look a little more cohesive and complex in design without feeling off or disorientating. But for the sequel, Capcom decided to just go,
their budget increased and they was like, damn, what about the computer graphics?
And they created stages using a mixture of 3D art and 2D elements. It's kinda cool to see how dated it looks in some stages, but in a certain ironic way, I love it. Like the carnival stage, the icy raft, or the desert. The stages in this game may be hard to look at in the grand scheme of things, especially as we've become so used to seeing 3D graphics looking near photorealistic, but I think that these stages are beautiful in their own, somewhat broken way. I also feel like the colors are slightly off in this game. Spidey looks even more orange in this one than the first. The skin tones and some suit colors are a little too bleak on some characters, and lack the same vibrance in the first game. It's not too noticeable to the point where the game looks completely different or ugly in any particular way, but I notice it enough. But I will say that I prefer the music in Marvel vs. Capcom 2. Not my favorite in the whole quadrilogy, but it has a few good hits. I Want to Take You for a Ride is a flippin' jam. I don't think there's any other piece of menu music that's held me at the character select screen for longer than this one, and this means a lot since I tend to stick around and listen to a lot of menu music that I hear in games. I don't envy anybody who has to watch me play Sonic CD because I sit around looking at the home screen for at least a good 20 minutes before I actually start the game. Marvel vs. Capcom 2 is such a great sequel. It feels like the developers at Capcom went and re-evaluated everything about the previous Marvel fighting games they'd made and tried to create a game that was able to capture more casual fans who may not be very big on gaming but have a genuine enough love for Marvel to the point where they would want to try out this game. Sure, the graphics ironically look more dated than those of Marvel Capcom 1, but the effort that was involved in creating these visuals is very charming to see. Regardless of how much I may prefer the look of the first game, I'm gonna rank Marvel vs. Capcom 2 a 3.8 out of 5. Although the first one is pretty fun, this one just has so much more to offer in a lot of ways, and it's probably the game I'll spend the most hours playing on this whole list. Marvel Nemesis Rise of the Imperfects was an arena fighting game released in late 2005, starring a good sum of our favorite Marvel characters going up against a dark and edgy group of bad guys who go by the moniker of the Imperfects, which is quite a fitting name after actually playing this game.
Hey, Taffy, Godzilla Mendoza already made that joke like 8 years ago or something. Maybe you want to try being a bit more original?
That's rich coming from you. You look like the odd ones out if you was a walking red flag.
You're the one who designed me, idiot.
Oh, come on, I was 14.
Also, what's with this cardboard thing you're doing now? That page flipping crap is just annoying. And don't get me started on the lack of lip syncing, you lazy bum.
Would you just get behind the camera and film? It was written by Raul Inglis and edgy comic book veteran Mark Millar, who we've mentioned in this channel before. Lazy plug, I don't care, go watch that after this. This game is such a massive product of its time that became pretty obscure and forgotten for pretty good reason. Not many people are interested in revisiting this moment in Marvel gaming history, or fighting game history for that matter, because it low-key sucks at both. It was produced by EA, which is somewhat shocking because EA is a mega corporation, and to see a game from this company being of such poor quality is embarrassing to say the least. The first time I ever heard of this game was during the 2020 lockdown. I was binge watching Godzilla Mendoza videos and I saw this thumbnail after finishing his Ultimate Alliance video, and let's just say that Xavier didn't seem too pleased with this game. I later learned more about emulation and was able to try this game for myself, and yep, I was not impressed either. The game feels like crap. It's the most unique arena fighting game I've ever touched, mainly because of how poor in quality it actually is. First of all, the camera is super zoomed out. In theory, this was probably done to help with the spatial awareness of the stages, as the arena is interactive as you can throw and destroy and blow up items. And it doesn't help that the character is already really awkward to control. The characters kind of feel like they're skating on ice or rollerblades. I would say I expected worse, but that doesn't mean that I had a good time playing it. The hitbox on these guys feel very, very strange as well, and you need to get extremely close to get a good swing in. Throwing objects feels stupid since you have to eyeball it nearly perfectly when chucking something at your opponent. But when you play against the computer, they turn into Prime Curry and never miss a throw. The game also has a rage meter, kinda like Def Jam Fight for New York, but either I suck at this game or the rage mode doesn't make much of a difference when playing because I didn't feel like anything changed. If I were to sum it up in one word, this game feels just cheap. The Dragon Ball Budokai games were being released around this time, so it's not like arena fighting games weren't figured out yet by developers, but there was a lack of proper thought, time, and money behind this game's mechanics by the feel of it. It kinda looks like a web game in comparison to other fighting games, not to mention the crappy UI. This game looks pretty ugly. It's going for a very edgy look, kinda like the 03 Daredevil or Ghost Rider movie, where everyone's constantly in perfectly lit dark areas, there's dark humidity surrounding the environments, and things just kind of blend together. And the Imperfects themselves are all just edgy OCs that look like they belong in Infamous or something. The Marvel characters don't look so bad though. As far as designs go, they're pretty simple and faithful to the source material that was being released at the time, so there's a lot of influence drawn from the Ultimate comics. Wolverine is an obvious one, and there's some others like Elektra. And then there's some characters who are impossible to get wrong like The Thing or Daredevil, but when it comes to everybody's favourite menace, Spider-Man, they just ripped the character model from Spider-Man 1 the video game. Wait, no, not that one. And it looks like the character designers weren't even given the chance to make the Imperfects look that cool either. They either wear all black or are half naked, which doesn't scream that much creative effort if you ask me. There's also these like evil alternate versions of the Marvel characters, and they're just like color swapped or turned down in saturation. It's not that great. And then there's the soundtrack, which is just generic battle music. Throw in some Kevin MacLeod and you wouldn't know the difference. Marvel Nemesis can be summed up as lackluster. Although I'm aware that EA are an evil, greedy mega corporation, they've produced one of my favorite games of all time. But Marvel Nemesis is not fun at all, and I don't know why I was so intrigued in playing this game when I was younger. Maybe I was a fan of the aesthetic, or maybe it was just the arena setting. Who knows? But I can't say that I was heavily disappointed when I actually played the game, because as I was coming up with the list of games I wanted to cover in this video, I wasn't super keen on playing it after looking at some playthroughs. This game's a 1.6 out of 5. I will most likely never ever touch this game again, and let's just end this filler segment and get back to the real Marvel fighting games.
A lot of people look up to me. Now I'll show you.
Nope. Broke. Fight!
The next generation of Marvel vs. Capcom games has started, and this game has made the jump very apparent. Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 was released in 2011 and is the first of the two 3D games in this quadrilogy, and it both surprises me but doesn't in many ways. Marvel vs. Capcom 3 still feels like the original two, although it was developed in a 3D engine and made for the 7th generation of consoles, meaning that the physics would work very differently from the 2D games. There's a lot of things that I like about this game, but that doesn't mean it won't be free of getting criticized or spoken of negatively. Whereas Marvel vs. Capcom 2 was able to expand the roster, experimenting with new graphics, as weird as they may have looked, and create a new playstyle that hadn't been seen before in the first Marvel vs. Capcom game, or in any other Capcom fighting games for that matter, Marvel vs. Capcom 3 kind of feels like the same old stuff but in 3D. As I said earlier, this game still feels like a Marvel vs. Capcom game, and doesn't stray too far from the original games that much. I played the Fightcade versions of the first two games, so I'm used to the 3-punch and kick attack systems, but adapted to controller format. But similar to the second game, Marvel vs. Capcom 3 has a 4 main button layout, and the shoulder buttons are mainly used for assists, dashing, and ultimates. The combos do feel pretty smooth in this game and are very fast, almost as if the game were made using 2D sprites. However, I miss the more complex feel that the originals had, as there are a lot of things to play around with by messing with the controls and taking time to figure out and master combos. I was shocked to find out that there was still a couple people who play this game online, and by a couple of people, I mean me and one other guy who was like 6 ranks above me, so I got my ass beat. But I have to say that for a game that came out on the PS3 and the Xbox 360, it feels pretty small. There's the arcade mode, couch co-op, and online gameplay, and that's pretty much it. No story mode, not even some little PowerPoint slideshows between the arcade mode fights to give a little narrative like Injustice. It's not that this makes the game itself bad, but it doesn't feel like the most effort went into it when comparing it to other fighting games that were released on 7th gen consoles, such as Injustice or Street Fighter 4, which had character-led arcade modes. But I understand it would be extremely complicated to do a mashed up 3-person arcade narrative, hence why I think this game could have introduced a mode that would have allowed for single character fights with rounds like in the Street Fighter games. Otherwise, Marvel vs. Capcom 3 doesn't appeal to me any much more than Marvel vs. Capcom 2. There are new characters that we hadn't seen in the series yet, which was pretty cool, but there are 36 playable characters in Marvel vs. Capcom 3, whereas Marvel vs. Capcom 2 had 56. From what I've read, this was because when developing MVC2, due to it being like the 5th Marvel Capcom fighter collaboration, it was able to recycle a lot of characters from those previous games. But due to MVC3 being made completely using 3D models and assets, the developers had to start from scratch, hence the smaller roster of characters and limited game modes. Apparently they intended on including Doc Ock, but his tentacles kept crashing the game, and even the Fantastic Four was supposed to be in the game too. So although the game doesn't feel as whole as I and probably others would have wanted, there is a valid reason why. So I'll give the game the benefit of the doubt. Graphically, the game looks pretty good, and I'm glad they didn't go for a super realistic Pixar style look for the jump to 3D graphics. The characters move brilliantly and the 3D models still have the same essence as the 2D sprites. Obviously, it feels a little different as they aren't individually drawn frames frames being alternated through, and that 2D animated vibe won't be there. But the 3D animated look does feel refreshing, and I like it. They use a shader in this game to give some line art to the characters and add black values to the models, as if they were inked like a comic book. Although it does look a bit dated, I really like this look for the game, and it reminds me a little bit of Ultimate Spider-Man for the PS2 and GameCube. The stages are where I think this game could use a good amount of improvement, because a lot of them felt kind of boring and grungy, which is my main issue with fighting games since they went to the 3D route. I can't really think of many standout backgrounds in 3D fighting games, whereas if I go back to MVC 1 and 2, Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, or the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure fighting games, I could hang these up as posters and they would look beautiful. But I don't get the same awe when I look at the backgrounds from most 3D fighting games. The last time I think I stopped and looked around at a background of a 3D fighting game was when I used to play Dead or Alive 6. And I hate that game. Just kidding, I was just trash. But certain backgrounds in this game are very powerful, with great depth, and I even went into the gallery section and just sat and looked at some of the ones I liked. And the music in this game is so damn good. It needs to be studied, bro. The tempo, the layers, the mixing. They remixed a lot of the themes from the first game, and I think they did a slightly better job this time round, especially without the compression. Spider-Man, Captain America, and Hawkeye's themes are hood classics. I think this should be in the conversation for the best Spider-Man theme song, honestly. Yes, over Elfman's theme, I'm sorry. This game's soundtrack feels very arcade-like, which matches the aesthetic very well, to the point where I'm so immersed that I feel like I'm not even playing this on a new-gen console. And I think I'm safely going to put this game's soundtrack on my #1 spot for this entire video. This might change later on, but so far, here it is. Marvel vs. Capcom 3 was cool. It was a alright little game. It wasn't bad at all, but it failed to do what I think a sequel should really do: add more. Changing the style to 3D doesn't necessarily mean that they added more. At the end of the day, the game will fundamentally play the same, and the characters will fight the same. Although they added some new characters that I really enjoyed playing as, or just admired how charming they were, the roster in MVC2 is just so much more packed and full of characters to mix and match with, so I'll give this game a 3.3 out of 5. It didn't impress me, but I wouldn't say that I was disappointed either. Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite was released in 2017 and is the last Marvel Capcom fighting game to be released so far. This game decided to switch up the formula established in the previous two Marvel vs. Capcom games by going back to the 2v2 fighting system rather than repeating the 3v3 system. But to add even more of a new edge, they implemented the 6 Infinity Gems rather than using an assist character like Marvel vs. Capcom 1. Did they do this to synergize with the MCU's Infinity Saga? I don't know. I couldn't find any confirmation, so let me know in the comments. MVC Infinite finally introduces some new things to the table other than new graphics or a few characters. It takes a different approach to the formula that the past two games had gotten players used to. The 3-man team is no more, and now it's back to being a 2v2 match. But instead of getting your assist character, you're given something new. As hinted in the game's title, there's an Infinity Stone theme going on in this game, where you get the option of picking one of the Infinity Stones, which can be used to amplify your abilities. But what's really cool about the Infinity Stones is that there's a meter kind of like the one you'd get for the ultimate moves, but when the Infinity Stone meter reaches a certain level, you can activate this chaos control type realm where you're just overpowered, and it's pretty sick. The moveset for the characters also finally have been upgraded. I understand the "if it ain't broke, don't fix it" mantra, but I got to say, I was so tired of basically playing characters with the exact same kit for so many hours. I don't think Capcom intended for loser nerds to be playing the entire Marvel vs. Capcom quadrilogy back to back, but they should have known better. So it's so damn refreshing to play Spider-Man who had some new moves. I was getting pretty tired of the spider stings, so you can imagine my absolute enthusiasm when I found the spider cannon in this game. And following suit of Injustice, there's a cinematic story mode, which will give you a good few hours to get used to the game. It felt refreshing after having to constantly go through the arcade mode of the original trilogy, which got a little draining for a while, so I thought this was a really nice change. Whoever made the AI for the arcade mode needs to take some notes. The first time I touched this game, I went to try the arcade mode, since that's my usual first thing to touch when I play these games. I finished this arcade mode in less than 30 minutes. How? I struggled so badly with the arcade modes in Marvel vs. Capcom 1, 2, and 3. How the hell did I beat the arcade mode with one single rematch against the boss? How? I was getting my arse beat back and forth in the 4th stage of Marvel vs. Capcom 1. Stage 5 of MVC2 almost made me jump off my roof. Then Marvel vs. Capcom 3, brother, I got dog walked like a yo-yo on stage 3. To all the old head fighting game dudes out there talking about some "back in my day, games were not solved like nowadays. That Magneto final boss in X-Men had me going bazonkers in the arcades." I agree! I went out like it was a cakewalk beating Sigma Ultron, but damn, I flew through stages 1 through through 5 like it was nothing. I mean, it was cool to finish it quickly, but there wasn't that much of a challenge, and the gameplay felt refreshing, but it could have been a little better, I'm not gonna lie. Whilst I'm fond of Infinite's gameplay, I really dislike the art direction of this game. I genuinely think that Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite has the worst art direction in any of the Marvel Capcom games ever, going all the way back to X-Men Children of Atom. This game fell under the 2010s Marvel Curse, which is the MCU Synergy umbrella. The art style of MVC Infinite doesn't have as strong of an anime or comic influence as the former games did. For example, the first game had a more comic accurate look to the characters, whereas Marvel vs. Capcom 2 had a slightly more manga style look to them, so there could be a little more synergy between the Street Fighter characters and the Marvel ones. The third one is a little more comic-like, and the 3D black cell shading adds some hand-drawn aesthetics that I really loved, but Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite looks so bland. I'm sure the models have lots of polygons, and the game has like one good stage that I like. I have absolutely no issue with the graphic fidelity or quality of the game here, but the art direction looks so dry. Not only is the art style lacking, but the characters themselves just look ugly. I mean, look at Ryu's face, and 90% of these costume designs suck so much arse. Iron Man looks like he's on his way to slime Bucky for killing his parents. Captain Marvel has no mask or helmet, and her head's extremely little. I don't know why that bugs me so much.
Watch it on your own tone.
Gamora is dressed like a damn stormtrooper. I'm sure there's a comic out there where she wore this fit to the Met Gala or something, but it doesn't look good. The Black Panther suit is really ugly. The proportions on him look super odd, and I think his eyes should match the gold accents on his suit. But the main two offenders on this list are Captain America and Hawkeye. These two have had it the worst with these modern designs in my opinion. Other than Captain America's actual MCU suits in the movies, all the imitators just look horrible. The grey armpit sections for Cap have always looked ugly to me as a kid. I never understood why it was necessary. If they were gonna add segments like that, I feel like a darker shade of blue would have been a little better. There's screws on his chest, why? And he also has a little head as well. But Hawkeye, man, why have they done this to my boy? I want to make an entire video on my hatred for this Hawkeye design because it's made me hate the character so much. It all started with his design in the Ultimates, which got rid of his cowl and gave him sunglasses and an arrow down his chest. It wasn't necessarily bad because it originally was black and red, which is a goated color combo. However, purple and black is a lot more difficult to pull off in such a way. And I think that this costume right here just screams that. Purple is one of my favorite colors, so please don't take this as if I'm not a fan of the color. I'm a massive advocate for Hulk wearing purple jorts, but these purple shades look so damn awful. I get they were trying to make him look more cool, which I think is supposed to be a part of Hawkeye's character nowadays, and in some cases it works, such as with the art of David Arhart in the Matt Fraction run, but in most cases he looks like a flipping goofball. I'll make a whole Hawkeye video on this later, I promise, but I really hate this costume design. Enough of this. Let's talk about some designs I like. Bucky looks fine, he's pretty difficult to mess up, and the same thing with Ghost Rider and Venom. I have no issues with them, but I really like Nova's design. I think his is my favorite in the game, but the soundtrack in this game is absolute doo-doo. I have nothing else to say other than it's just generic battle music again. No song stuck out to me at all when I was playing this game. It wasn't great. Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite was so disappointing to me, I'm sorry. I really wanted to like it, but I found it to be just bland. The atmosphere of this game was pretty uninteresting to me, and the gameplay was decent, but not crazy enough to make this one of my favorites, let alone one I liked. I like to catch vibes when I'm playing a game, whether I'm a knight getting burnt up by a dragon or killed by bushes in Dark Souls, or whether I'm a blue hedgehog zooming back and forth between the past, present and future in the dystopic world of Little Planet whilst the hardest soundtrack of all time is playing, or I'm beating the crap out of someone in a fighting game with some cool beats in the background in some randomly beautiful place that shouldn't be getting disrespected by all the sounds of thuds and attacks. But when I played this game, I wasn't really catching any vibes. I was occupied but not having that much fun, if that makes any sense. So I'm gonna rank this game a 2.6 out of 5. It's on par with Marvel vs. Capcom 3 in some ways, but I'll give the developers some points for creating a full cinematic story mode, which hadn't been done yet for this series. But if I had to choose any game in the Marvel vs. Capcom series, I'm definitely not picking this one. I'm going with the Unks and I'm playing Marvel vs. Capcom 2. Also, I want to mention the fact that I couldn't find a single player online to play this game with multiple days in a row, but I found a few matches on Marvel vs. Capcom 3, so yeah, that should say something. But as we close this chapter of Marvel fighting games, it's time to start anew with my boys over at DC. At long last, we get to see what both Marvel and Capcom's biggest competitors have to offer in the superhero fighting game subgenre, starting off for the first collaboration between the Mortal Kombat franchise and DC Comics in 2008's Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe. This game was produced by Midway Games just 2 years before the company went defunct, and was directed by Mortal Kombat co-creator Ed Boon. Earlier in this video I incorrectly said that NetherRealm produced this game in 2010 after Midway had shut down. Anyways, the game has very mixed opinions shared from players over the years. From what I've read, upon release there was a large sum of players who weren't very fond of the game for its toned down violence that Mortal Kombat games were so known for, but nowadays I've seen a lot of people expressing the nostalgia they have for the game and their desires to replay it. Although I've never had the pleasure to play this game before this video, it's always been a game I've wanted to try since I'm so largely attached to the Injustice series already. I've even mentioned it before on my channel in the Injustice 2 video I made, so I got down to business and tried to play this game on my PC and
Computer graphics.
So I bought a used 360 copy, dusted off my Xbox One, and got to boxing. My first impressions of the game weren't really that great, I'll be honest. The game felt a bit sluggish and clunky compared to pretty much every other fighting game on this list. The characters didn't move as fast as I expected, and I felt that made the pacing of matches drag a little bit. Not because I was having a hard time against my opponent, but because the match just felt slow. But the thing that really shocked me was that this game broke all the rules I'd gotten myself used to by having the game function more like an arena fighter, kind of like Tekken or Dead or Alive, where you can rotate around the map and sidestep.
I can't respect it, that's weak as fuck.
Oh. You just spam him?
You literally went to the Z axis, I can't, no, that's not it.
Now this was quite novel when I first realized this, and I was pretty excited. For about 2 minutes. You can dodge moves by sidestepping out of the way, and you have to jump with the shoulder buttons. It helped me admire the really cool stages and scenery, sure. Well, I felt the game lacked as much of a cohesive feel, if you know what I mean. But aside from that, this game does have some features that are able to outshine the Marvel Capcom games, because these things kind of just have their own flair to it. If you get close enough and press the right bumper, you get into this little close-up fist fight, which is pretty cool and kind of reminds me of a clench in boxing because it slows down the pace a little more and allows you to catch your breath. I'm not talking about catching your breath in a video game. But my favorite function in this game is when you get really close to the edge of the stage, you can hit your opponent off the edge where you'll have a free-fall fight where you can wallop your ops into the ground. It's such a good mechanic which I adore, and I really wish it would have been added to the newer Mortal Kombat entries. The combos feel pretty cool, some characters were a bit slower than others, but I'm assuming it's due to their different fighting styles, but I really took a liking to characters like The Flash, Lex Luthor, and Wonder Woman. Both their speed, cool personalized animations, and how memorable their movesets were. But although I enjoyed these aspects, the gameplay still had those areas from earlier that felt pretty unpolished. Design-wise, the game is sort of a mixed bag for me. There are character designs in this game that I have practically nothing negative to say about them, like The Flash, Captain Marvel, Green Lantern, or Wonder Woman. But man, do some of these designs have great foundations than just do something stupid to ruin it. Batman is my primary example. They make a textbook Batsuit, and for some dumb reason, they add a bunch of random lines all over it. This is a known design trend with live action and modern supersuit designs, which many other creators have talked about on here. But this is one of the worst ones I think I've ever seen, because it's completely unnecessary. At least the fake seams and lines on most of these suits that we see are practical in the sense of them being like sewed stitch marks or wires. But this suit just throws lines on it on the most random places. It's gross. I get that Batman wears armor or Kevlar, but at least make the armor pieces look like pieces and not like you drew a bunch of lines on with a Sharpie. Deathstroke is a weird one because his design is extremely comic accurate, but that comes with the practicality issue. How does one wear fish scales like those in the most awkward of places? For example, Captain America's fish scales are only in the upper part of his torso, because I can imagine it wouldn't make much sense for them to be somewhere like your elbows or knees, where you have to move the most. Superman looks pretty much perfect, but I just have one issue with him: his face. He looks evil. The suit is perfect, don't get me wrong, but this doesn't really look like Clark Kent. It looks more like Bruce Wayne, especially with that scowl he has. Although I've been pretty critical of some of the suits in this game though, the stages are just knockouts. The layouts, the colors, and overall architecture of some of these arenas are gorgeous. The Fortress of Solitude has never looked better in my opinion. Themyscira? I'm gonna call it that. Themyscira has this amazing split down the center showing off Outworld, and then obviously we get Wonder Woman's home from the DC universe all in one arena, and it's just fantastic. And then they topped it off by making the ground covered in water, like just above ankle height, so when you move around you can see the water ripple and stuff, and like just that, it adds a little bit of flair, you know? They didn't need to do it, but they did. I like that.
You gonna make me act up.
They made a beautiful version of the Owen Senate, and I think this might be my favorite arena in the game. The Special Forces base looks sick, and I absolutely adore the Gotham City stage in this game. The game has this dark atmosphere, but they don't overdo it. You can still see the details on pretty much everything, but there's just that little bit of grit to make it look more mature. But although these aspects are amazing, the game is held back severely by its crappy UI. The hit counts are written in this ugly-ass Microsoft Word 2013 font. The loading screens are full of these super awkward still renders, which I assume are from the story mode, and what is that? And the main menu screen is pretty mid. When comparing it to future DC fighting games that Ed Boon's team have worked on, this main menu screen looks pretty weak. The idle animations that Batman and Scorpion have just don't look natural, especially because Batman is blinking when he's clearly wearing a cowl with lenses, and also he's not mewing, which just feels wrong. Then Scorpion is in this awkward pose, which looks super cool for like a few seconds until you realize that he's been doing that for a pretty long time, and his arm might get tired from being raised in that position for so long. In comparison to other Marvel home screens though, I guess it's somewhat better, but this game's soundtrack is decent. Not above average or anything, it's fine. The main menu theme is pretty tough, but not stuck in my head tough, if that makes sense. There were also a few bangers that I heard in some of the matches I played, but if you put a gun to my head right now, I couldn't hum any of them from memory, I'm sorry. Whilst Mortal Kombat vs DC impressed me, I was even more surprised by it. The whole breaking the Z-axis, the stage switches, the arena designs, it made for a pretty cool game. I liked it to a decent extent aesthetically, but that doesn't take away from its clunkiness though when actually playing it. It wasn't terrible, but to say there could be improvement would be a bit of an understatement if you ask me. So I'm gonna rate this game a 2.8 out of 5. It's almost like this game had the complete opposite problems that Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite had. I like this game, but I don't know how many other times I'm gonna play it, but if I do, I'm sure I'll have a fun time. After Midway Games had come to an end, Ed Boon went to Warner Bros. To start NetherRealm Studios, his new production company that would continue the Mortal Kombat series. But the first game to actually be released under this new studio was Injustice, which came out in 2013. Injustice is one of the most infamous projects that I think DC has to offer. Whilst it's a great fighting game, and there's a pretty iconic selection of DC characters in the first game, there's a lot of discourse when discussing the Injustice storyline, both in game and comics, due to a lot of characters essentially being character assassinated to work in the favor of the game's concept. I don't really want to go into that because everyone else has done that, so let's just move on. Nobody sticks around to play Injustice just for the story mode. We're here to beat up our friends as our favorite DC characters, so that's what I'm here to talk about. But before we get into it, let's hear some lore about how I first got introduced to this game. My first experience with Injustice was using the mobile edition on my tablet. This game was more of a 3v3 beat 'em up, but there was an online multiplayer option allowing for players to compete. But as I was about 8 when I started playing this game, my parents didn't want me interacting with strangers on the internet. At that time, I was somewhat aware of DC lore due to watching cartoons like Justice League Unlimited and The Batman, but I really latched on to Injustice as the place where I could learn about DC, since I could pretty much play it whenever I wanted, whereas I couldn't control the times that the cartoons would be aired on TV. But I think the main reason why I found so much comfort in this game was that I first started playing it right after my parents had split up. Since I was pretty young, I didn't really understand what was going on or why it was going on. Frustration tended to be my default feeling for quite a while, and my main outlet for that frustration was playing the Injustice mobile game. I don't think it was necessarily the violence in that game that I used to let out my aggression, but I think I found comfort in the idea that I got to be these characters in the superhero cartoons that I loved so much. I always adored the idea that I could just become these characters that I admired so much, and because I didn't own a console at the time, this was my best bet. Fast forward a few years to a 14-year-old Taffy, I was watching YouTube and somehow I came across the Corey Kenshin Injustice 2 series. I somewhat was aware of Injustice 2, but I never really paid too much attention to it at the time, and that's when it hit me. I haven't even played the console edition of the OG Injustice, let alone the sequel. So I rushed out of my house and got myself a used Xbox 360 copy of the game and finished the storyline within like 2 nights, and I was completely hooked. Before working on this video, I hadn't touched the game in like a year or two since I don't bother to use my Xbox anymore. So when I booted up the game, I got a crazy rush of nostalgia. That wall that gets crushed to show the logos at the start, the powerful theme song, the brilliant renders in the menu screen, the DLC characters that I was too broke to buy, and not gonna lie, it was pretty great. Like Mortal Kombat vs DC, the direction of Injustice was led by Ed Boon, and due to this, it still feels very much like a Mortal Kombat game. The hits in NetherRealm's games always always have a concrete feel whenever I play them, and this is extremely apparent here. Unlike the Marvel vs. Capcom series, this game feels a little less flowy, but kind of like swift clockwork. The combos connect very well, but don't flow like water, if that makes any sense. Similarly to the last game, it's not as brutal as an actual Mortal Kombat title because it was given a PEGI 16 rating, most likely due to DC being an IP that a vast audience should be able to enjoy. You'd think that the toned down violence would be a major L for this game, but NetherRealm were able to find a pretty good balance in the graphic violence in this game. There's some visible blood that can be seen, but something that I forgot to mention in the last game was that characters can take visible damage during these fights, and the actual violent attacks and super moves in this game are brutal. They just miss the mass amounts of blood and guts and skeletons that a mainline Mortal Kombat game would have. Also, there are no fatalities for obvious reasons. In the last game there were, but I didn't mention them because they weren't that brutal, so in my opinion they were kind of redundant. The stages are pretty interactive in this game, but not like the others. There's no Z-axis or sidestepping, I think they gave up on that. You can do a lot more than you can than in the MVC games, where the stages are just backgrounds. They're nice to look at, but they can't be interacted with. But in Injustice, you can throw cars, vault off things, kick people into statues, and like in the last game, you can beat up your opponents so bad, they can get sent flying off the stage through the environment and onto a whole new stage in another area where you're able to fight. This is one of my favorite fighting game features, and I don't know if NetherRealm have copyright protected it or something, but if Capcom started doing this, let's just say NetherRealm would have died fighting the good fight. This feature and the interactive stage saves the game from falling into being a mediocre DC fighting game, and gives me a decent reason to pick it up every once in a while. But whilst I'm a fan of this game, I do have some gripes with its look. You see, the suit designs look really cool. Although I've made my comments on how I miss when superhero suits weren't just glorified armor, and I'm a large advocate for bringing back the spandex, like MK vs DC, ironically, I used Injustice 2 as my main negative example for this because I think that that game kind of went overkill with its armor. However, I think that this game struck a near perfect balance between the classic look of superhero costumes and the new armored look. The bat suits in this game look very similar to the ones in the Dark Knight trilogy, with the armor correctly covering the different muscle sections, whilst the cowl has long pointed ears and it's molded to surround Batman's face. I like the subtle differences between the multiversal doppelgangers in this game, such as the slight shape variation in Batman's cowls, and the heavier armor in the Insurgency Batman suit since he has to fight Superman. I like how they made the good Superman suit more classic and subtly armored, where the regime Superman has these very pointed armored shoulder pads that blend into his cape, making him look grander, a larger logo, and a more purple-blue tint to his suit. However, the colors is where this game lacks the most, even more than its graphics. I don't know if I'd ever want to describe this game as beautiful because I don't think that's what it's trying to be. That's sort of the pattern with this game. Characters from the Injustice universe wear outfits which pretty much show us that if they see their ops, it's on site and they're never lacking. Whereas the mainline universe has the characters wearing more classic outfits, slightly modernized and adapted of course, but you can still tell where the roots are from. I like this detail to show that this Injustice universe is way more ugly and grim. Another detail I loved about this game was that the characters take visible damage. After you win, you'll see the gashes, tears, and bruises that your characters obtained after beating the crap out of one another, which was a real nice touch that I don't think the sequels included, but I've always liked how the Mortal Kombat series does this, and I feel like Street Fighter could take some notes there. But ironically, the things that I just praised this game for happen to also be its major pitfall, the fact that it's set in an ugly, broken alternate universe, which means that the vibe and aesthetic are somewhat ugly too. Everything is coated in either a muddy, dark, or grungy atmosphere, and the world feels like it's been polluted by fumes from a Funko Pop landfill. Although the character models are technically good, they're held back by the game's color palette being so muted and stale. I spoke of how much I love some of the intricate details in the game, but they can go pretty unnoticed when you're playing, since the game has such a dull color palette. Some might like it, but I'm not the biggest fan of the aesthetic. I think it goes a little overboard and could reel in the grunge a little bit. I love DC's slightly grimmer tone than Marvel, but there are levels to how they could represent this. The stages aren't as memorable as the ones in Marvel vs. Capcom, or even in Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe, since they aren't all as appealing to the eye. I like the Hall of Justice stage for its cool details, like the Atom and Vixen fighting in the background, or Gotham City for its gothic look. And I only like Atlantis because it just looks like Jar Jar Binks' home from Phantom Menace. And then I'm a huge sucker for the Watchtower because I grew up on Justice League Unlimited. But the stages like Metropolis, Wayne Manor during the day, Insurgency, the Batcave, Strikers Island, and more are kind of boring. But I will say that the game's soundtrack is amazing. It's not arcade style music like the majority of the Marvel vs. Capcom games, but a cinematic soundtrack that elevates the vibes and theme of this game. So wherever I felt those gaps were from the visual development, it gets filled by the this soundtrack. Unlike Marvel Nemesis or Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, the Injustice 1 soundtrack is more thematic and has very memorable melodies and tunes which are stuck in my head. The main Injustice theme is so well composed and is iconic. When I think of DC, this theme song is what comes to my mind really quick. It isn't just a constant loop, but it builds up and builds up until it crescendos into the main part of the theme, which is just the Metropolis theme is also pretty cool and makes you want to stone cold stunner somebody on the street. And the Batcave theme is pretty cool because, I don't know, it's Batman. Trying not to be blinded by nostalgia, I adore this game. I think it's the best NetherRealm and DC collaboration so far. The character designs, the brutality, and even the aesthetic is exactly what differentiates this game from Marvel vs. Capcom. I've always found DC to be slightly more gritty and mature than Marvel, even though one of their poster children wears red trunks over a blue spandex suit. I expected to be kind of disappointed when I picked up the game, but honestly it felt pretty damn good. I really liked the pace of fight and found it to be a very refreshing take in comparison to the Marvel vs. Capcom games. So I'm going to rank Injustice a 4 out of 5. Yes, it's the highest on my list. I'm so sorry, but the nostalgia may have done got me. I much prefer Injustice to the 3D Marvel vs. Capcom games, and although I'm very fond of Marvel vs. Capcom 2, I think Injustice 1 just has a slight edge that defeats it. Okay, it's time. If you're somewhat an OG of my channel, or just went back in my video catalog and found this Injustice 2 video, you know that I have some controversial opinions on this game in the design department, but I didn't give the game that fair of a chance in this video, mainly because it was supposed to be satirical, and the entire point was to point and laugh at things that I didn't like at the time. However, I should have been more fair to the good things in this game, and address the very important fact that the game has a gear system, which allows you to choose different suit designs, color schemes, customization slots, which all has an effect on your actual gameplay too. When I spoke up about the designs of this game, I was going in from a story mode standpoint, looking at designs that were canon to the Injustice story, but when playing online and multiplayer, the look of the character is completely up to the player. So if you watched that video and I made any confusion, I apologize. And to all the artists who worked on those suit designs back in Injustice 2, I also apologize if I offended you if you saw this, which you probably didn't, so why am I even talking right now? You guys are awesome. You did a good job technically, I just wasn't a fan personally. Okay, after clearing that up, let's get into a proper discussion. And boy, I'm already off to a bad start. Unfortunately, I found Injustice 2 to be one of my least favorite games on this list gameplay wise. The controls are pretty much the same as those in the first, but this game tones down the ultra-violent gore even more than Injustice 1 did. The game's also rated PEGI 16, so there are some moments where I can get brutal, but it feels like a kid's book cover song in comparison to actual Mortal Kombat gameplay, which is usually rated 18. So lots of the violence is both toned down in the gameplay and cutscenes of the story mode, where a lot of the gore takes place off screen. And they even removed the feature where you can see the battle damage done to characters. Injustice 2 being less brutal allows for it to appeal to more people, and this is backed up by its very pick up and play style, leaning away from super complex fighting mechanics. There are only 3 buttons which actually do proper strike moves, and the shoulder button which can be used to perform throws and environmental attacks and switch stances. The game can be super button mashy and doesn't feel as skill based as the first couple of Marvel vs. Capcom games, or even the previous Injustice and Mortal Kombat vs. DC games. They do have a system which works with the rotation of your joystick, but it doesn't feel that fluid in my opinion. I had a similar issue with Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, where the game's attempt at appealing to more casual audiences made it a lot less rewarding when landing combos or getting through the arcade mode, since you could essentially just button mash and get what you want, or just spam the right heavy attacks and throw until you can get your ult meter to its maximum capacity. Although I think Injustice's gameplay mechanics fall short to most competitors, the special moves are still brutal eye candy. There's a plethora of DC characters to choose from, and the game is pretty fun to play with friends since there's a pretty small skill gap on a base level. The stages are still interactive and you can hit people into things, throw objects, and bounce off them to retreat. It also brings back the stage switches that were in Injustice 1, which will give this game a few extra brownie points. I also really appreciated the different DLC characters in this game, such as the TMNT and Hellboy. In NetherRealm have got pretty good at obtaining non-Big 2 superheroes in their fighting games, such as Mortal Kombat 11 featuring Spawn, and Mortal Kombat 1 featuring Homelander and Omni-Man. When it comes to playing online, it can get more complex with the customization of your character's gear. I tried my hand at playing ranked, but as you can imagine, the only people playing ranked on this 7-year-old fighting game are absolute sweats, who have a ton of gear, which meant I got clapped. To those waiting to hear my thoughts on the designs again nearly 2 years later, I'm sorry, nothing much has really changed when it comes to my thoughts on the base costume designs. If you want to see my thoughts on that, my video on the costume designs are in the description, but I do think that there are a lot of cool alternative options when looking at the alternate suits and gear in this game. However, However, I prefer the visual development of Injustice 2 to its predecessor by quite a bit. The first game has a very washed out and muddy color palette. I think the character designs themselves look better than most of the ones in Injustice 2, but they're ruined for me by the game's gross demeanor. I definitely see the vision that they were going for with Injustice, but I feel like conceptually it was great, but not executed to its proper potential. I mean, just look at these two cutscenes from Injustice 1 and 2, and please tell me you see what I'm trying to say. But Injustice 2's graphic fidelity is light years better, and the colours look brilliant. The Swamp Thing stage is dark but very clear and beautiful in its green and natural colours, and might be my favourite in the game. And the colours on every character's suits pop. Even the characters that are basically wearing all black like Batman and Black Canary have a punchy look to them. The visual development of this game is top tier and I have pretty much zero complaints there. Honestly, Injustice 2 wasn't all I expected it to be. I felt a little disappointed with the playstyle because the trade-off didn't feel as good as it did with Injustice, where I feel like that game's brutality was better, and therefore it made the simpler button layout feel a little more gratifying. And also I felt like the combos in Injustice 2 didn't flow as nice as the former. The visual development of the game, however, is really nice to look at in comparison to the first game. The colours pop and the environments aren't melded into a grey atmosphere, and the character designs can be personalised in this game to fit whatever needs or desires you want. So instead of having to get whole skins, you can play or pay to upgrade your looks and abilities of your characters. Whilst this game is fun, it didn't stand out to me as much as I wished, and I don't see myself replaying it that often. So personally, I'm gonna give Injustice 2 a 3 out of 5. The game is fun, but it's far from being a masterpiece, and I would still easily choose to play Injustice 1 over Injustice 2. I really appreciate all the love and support I've received over these past few months, guys. It hits me now and then that although some of my videos don't get as crazy views as others, there's still an audience of a few thousand people who watched my hour-long retrospective on 6 Batman animated movies. And your comments always make my day, more than you would know. I want to give a sincere thank you to everybody who's watching, who's subscribing, and who's enjoyed whatever I make. Now I'm gonna go and work on the next video because I have nothing better to do. Alright nerds, see you next time. UMG, this is a parody, and the beats reproduced, so please don't take this down. I woke up today, and what did I see? I just hit 10k, oh goodness me. 10,000 people watching videos about cartoons and comics and shows. Yeah, I took like 2 months to release, but I'm losing hell like I'm the Rock and get no sleep. But guess what, your comments are what keep me on my feet. They help me to float like Ollie, then sing like I'm a bee. Unless my vids flop, then I'll be unhappy. But I get up every morning, start trying again and again and again and again and again and again. I run out of lyrics again, 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 again. Hold on, somebody's at the door. Let me go outside and check so I can do my chores. Oh shit, wait, shit. Is YouTube code ID? I didn't think I'd get caught using this beat. It's supposed to be unreleased, I should have been safe. Damn, I even went through the trouble of getting one that was reproduced. What am I gonna do? Please, they're gonna hit me, please. They're gonna hit me with a strike. Help, help, no,
Hit that like button.